Our story begins with three kids who in the 2000s would become known around the world as Ned, Cookie, and Mose. And the one who was known to the world as Ned was a child actor named Devin Werkheiser who only had one credit to his name, and that was the Paramount movie We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson. The movie wasn't a hit financially, making only $115 million on a budget of $75 million, but the beauty was it did get Devin Werkheiser introduced with Paramount, which was the owner of Nickelodeon. Now it ended up becoming very valuable for Devin Werkheiser because it brings us to this man right here named Scott Fellows, who had the idea to do a show on Nickelodeon about middle school. And explaining Scott Fellows' background, he started off as a writer for Disney, writing many episodes of the show Recess, but then he got hired by Nickelodeon a few years later to work for Butch Hartman and work on 36 episodes of the show Fairly OddParents. But even though Scott Fellows was more known for animation, he thought there was an untapped market for Nickelodeon with a show about school because all the shows they were doing in live action like Little Romeo and Brothers Garcia were more family-centric, so he just had this idea to do a show that was completely set in school and they didn't even show the families. That's how Scott Fellows and Devin Werkheiser would end up meeting, because he came up with this idea to do a show called Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, and because Devin Werkheiser already had some contacts with Paramount, they recommended him for Ned. So they ended up having a show on their hands, but they ended up needing an actress to take the lead, so they ended up hiring Lindsay Shaw, who at the time was just a teenager and had no experience prior with acting, but they thought she was right for the part. Even though they did run into a little bit of an issue early on in filming because they thought Lindsay Shaw was a little too developed, being 2 years older than Devin Werkheiser was, so they actually set a rule for her character where she could only wear jackets and sweatshirts because they wanted to cover some things up. That leads us to our final character creating the pilot, and that was a guy named Steve Markarian, who played a character called Boogie. Yes, that's correct. Daniel Lee Curtis, who at the time was only known for doing one episode of the show The Shield in a small part, wasn't actually in the original pilot for Ned's Declassified. Instead, Nickelodeon opted to hire Steve Markarian to be a lead character in the show, who was already doing some episodes of other Nickelodeon shows like one episode of Drake and Josh. But the problem was, even though Steve was a perfectly fine actor, they just didn't like the idea they made a show where they had 3 white leads and there was no diversity in the main cast. Nickelodeon told the main cast they were going to redo the pilot, and they weren't promising any of them work in the future pilot again where they were all fired, and one of them would be replaced by a diverse actor. And they ended up firing Steve Markarian, even though they did give him a smaller role later on in the series, but still he was fired from the main cast. And then when they hired Daniel Lee Curtis to play the character of Boogie, they renamed the character to Cookie because there was this idea Boogie could be seen as a derogatory term towards black people. From that point on, they created a show with Ned's Declassified that was pretty popular, getting 915,000 viewers per episode on average, which really wasn't that great for what Nickelodeon was pulling with other live action shows, where the finale of Zoey 101 had 7 million viewers. And then there was also the mega hit of iCarly, which in the second season was averaging 11 million viewers per episode. The problem was not that Ned's Declassified was bad or didn't appeal to a lot of people, but the real issue was this man right here, who we all know as Dan Schneider. At this point in Nickelodeon's history, Dan Schneider basically had a monopoly on all their live-action programming, where he started in the 1990s doing the show All That and was also dominating with Drake and Josh at the time. So because Dan Schneider had so much pull with Nickelodeon, he'd always work for all of his shows to have the best airing time, where the other shows that weren't produced by him got the worst and thus bad ratings. But still, despite this, Ned's Declassified was able to pull it off and become a success on Nickelodeon, where they ran for 54 episodes, which, just to put that in perspective, Drake and Josh only did 2 fewer episodes at 56. And it was still successful enough that Nickelodeon wanted to actually do a spin-off series with the main cast about high school, where Devin Werkheiser did sign a contract to do the spin-off show with Nickelodeon and Scott Fellows as well. But unfortunately, they ran into the issue of timing, where after Devin Werkheiser signed on to do a spin-off series, Scott Fellows had his other show, Big Time Rush, picked up by Nickelodeon. And then there was the issue that Daniel Lee Curtis couldn't do the show either because he already signed with Disney to do the show Zeke and Luther instead. And they also ran into the issue that Lindsay Shaw couldn't come back again because she already signed up with ABC Family to do another show called 10 Things I Hate About You, which ran for 21 episodes. The reason both Shaw and Curtis ended up leaving Nickelodeon for other projects with Disney was because there was a weird loophole with the Actors Union in Nickelodeon where they didn't have to give their child actors royalties, so because of that they decided to move over to Disney where they were promised royalties. From that point on, the cast has been working in Hollywood but not doing many projects, with one example being Daniel Lee Curtis, who's booked a lot of different TV shows but nothing in the main cast. Then Lindsay Shaw had probably the most success outside of Ned's Declassified, where she landed a recurring role in Pretty Little Liars and has done other projects since. And then there was Devin Werkheiser, who tried a career in music, but after not having the most success there, was working a normal 9-to-5 job for a few years until trying to break into acting again. He's had some tough luck where he was trying to get a career resurgence with the movie Rust, but that ended up turning out to be a total disaster. That wasn't of his fault at all, but that just happened to be the movie where Alec Baldwin tragically shot and killed someone. The movie's yet to be released. But instead, the strongest point for the three of them seems to be reuniting as adults, where they did a podcast together talking about their time doing Ned's Declassified, and the pilot actually got 2 million views on YouTube alone. Devin Werkheiser actually on the pilot revealed that after iCarly was brought back by Nickelodeon on Paramount Plus, he tried to get the show to be brought back as a new series called Ned's Declassified Life Survival Guide, but Paramount actually told him no. Lindsay Shaw on the podcast actually had a theory for this, saying that the reason for it was because Nickelodeon only cares about shows that were made by Dan Schneider, even with all of his controversies. And the craziest thing is I actually met Devin, Lindsay, and Daniel at VidCon. We were actually staying at the same hotel, and I actually bought them a round of shots when I first met them, and they were such nice people, and also Devin really loves dogs. Talking to them, there definitely was a big sense of unity from the three, where they're still very close friends and it's very visible looking at it, but there is this big problem that Paramount just won't give them the ability to make a new show, really just because they aren't a Dan Schneider show, which is really messed up. But with that, I'm Charles Pearl. Please subscribe to learn something.